broadcasting from sunny Miami. Tonight we have the pleasure of having John Byler, the author of a book, You Look Great. He's a traumatic brain injury survivor and recoverer. We'll also have the pleasure of being joined by an Iraqi neurosurgeon who did a great hangout on Bullets from the Sky last night, Amar Adi. Good evening, Amar.
Good evening, John. Thank you for inviting me, and in fact, I'm very glad to be part of this hangout with you, John Bennett, and our guest John, and to talk about his head injury and the great recovery and his book. Thank you very much.
Very good, and welcome. I'm sure you'll have a lot of good questions for John. And John Byler, welcome, John.
Thank you, John. I want to call you Dr. Bennett, but I'm trying very hard to call you John.
Well, that's okay. Whatever's comfortable.
All right. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. You know, I represent a lot of people who don't have credentials. Okay.
Well, you have the credentials of recovering very nicely from a traumatic brain. John, why don't you begin by telling what happened in your recovery process and where you're at now, and then go into your presentation.
Well, actually, that is my presentation. The core of it is the brain injury recovery team model. But I lead up to the creation of the model by telling how I got there, basically how I got better. And I start with one of the first slides, the picture of the car. So.
Okay, that's very good.
Okay, shall I just go straight to the presentation then?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here goes. This is the cover. Obviously, You Look Great. It's the name of my book. It's also a picture of something that every author would love to see, and that's someone taking their book and reading it so thoroughly that they put little yellow flags all over it and mail you a picture of it. So I was so gratified to see that that picture from a friend of mine. Yes, a piece of brain tissue the size of a grain of sand contains 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses, all talking to one another. I believe that for my money, NASA can have Mars, because neurotrauma rehabilitation is the next great frontier. These are some numbers, and this, my little parentheses there, I just added about 30 minutes ago because I realized I didn't know. I've been using this slide for a while now, and I don't know if this is deaths in the U.S. or worldwide. But what I did was I took the data, and I that had to do with brain, because you know, we're all in this together with the brain issues. However it got traumatized, you know, even an aneurysm, stroke. A successful brain surgery, these are traumas to the brain. And you might go home and everyone's saying, you look fine, you look great even, and the person who's had his brain violated knows that he or she might never be the same. And he looks the same, and it becomes very confusing. But a good friend of mine has Parkinson's. He's 72, and he's going to stop going to his support group and start going to the one we have in Wichita, which is traumatic brain injuries, because he just feels a kinship with what we're doing there, and our numbers are growing because we've expanded the category of what it means to traumatize the brain. And here's just another way of looking at some of the similar numbers in terms of fundraising, in terms of attention paid. You know, I think that red semicircle should be a flag for us. We've got to pay attention to healing the brain, and to do what we can to stop it from being injured in the first place. Hippocrates, arguably the father of medicine, men ought to know that from nothing else but the brain come joys, delights, laughter and sports, grief, despondency, and lamentation. Well, you'd think we'd take better care of it. I was walking down the grocery aisle and I saw this and I was appalled. This is the message we're sending our young people. This is a hero. I object, Your Honor. And then I was channel surfing the other day, and there was a cage match between two human beings, and I felt like I was watching the Planet of the Apes. And it was sponsored by Bud Light and Harley Davidson. So in my anger, I tweeted. I tweeted about it. you know, cartoon. I won't lie, it doesn't look good. And then there's the matter of professional football. This neurologist tested the brains of 79 ex-NFL players believed to have brain damage. She found it in 76. This is my story. I was hit from behind at a high speed on a highway outside of Boston, Route 495, near Chelmsford, Massachusetts. The first year I couldn't talk very well, and I couldn't listen to music because it was too much for my brain. My brain already felt full. But I started making some progress, and I had a team of specialists at Spalding. It's a teaching hospital for Harvard Medical School, so I knew I was in good hands. And professionally, before my accident, I was what's called an instructional designer. And so I would work with companies to basically form a process. What's the process? Can we replicate it? And can we scale it? And so that, you know, the instructional designer in me went through the process, and that led me to the creation of what I called the brain injury recovery team model. And we'll get there. And then along the way, I was asked to be on the board of the Brain Injury Association in Massachusetts, and I'm honored to do that. That was before my book even came out. And this is the doctor in charge of my rehabilitation at Spalding, is Ross Zafont. You should Google him. You know, hundreds of millions of dollars are now being invested in research by the NFL, the Department of Defense, and he holds the purse strings to a lot of that research. And I have been the subject of some of that research, and I have stories to tell about what happened and what went well and what went horribly wrong. So my agenda here, I'm going to go through my objectives. They're quick, and I've organized the presentation in 3 parts as I've organized my book: awareness, adjustment, and acceptance. Objectives. I'm going to describe the brain injury recovery team model. It's an interdisciplinary approach to neurotrauma rehabilitation. There's a medical side and there's a therapy side, and I think you ought to lace those 2 things together as tight as a football. That's the first time I ever said that. But and now I want to explain that when I first saw Dr. Zafont, he was very realistic with me, and he said, John, he said, can I continue talking? Yeah. Okay.
Please.
Okay.
Sure. And so when I walked into his office, you know, and we met for the first time, he told me, I don't want you to think that I can cure you, John, but let's shoot for improving the quality of your life by 25%. And I said, I'm in. So that's what we shot for. Now here's the statement of the problem. A patient, you might be a veteran coming home from the war. You might be somebody like me who came home from the highway. You might be a football player after practice, and you just feel horrible. But that's about as far as your vocabulary goes. You just tell the doctor, I just feel terrible. And then the doctor, whether it's haste or whatever, but the next step is critical, because in trying to streamline the process, meaning to get the patient in and out of his or her office quickly, the doctor starts leading the witness. Are you depressed? Oh man, I'm depressed. Well, you know what? You've got to understand the difference between being sad and being depressed. Clinical depression is a whole other thing. Are you feeling anxious? Well, yes. Okay, there's a difference between feeling nervous, understandably, and feeling clinically anxious where you're going to pass out. I talked to a woman yesterday in Wichita who, when she gets triggered a certain way, she gets very anxious, which triggers epileptic fits. So this is a very real important part of this process when the patient first talks to the doctor. Now, if you start having that much respect for the authority in front of you, you're basically going to do what you're told, and what you're told is this. Most often it's that. And I can't tell you how I've been in this now for 10.5 years, and my heart's been broken time and time again by my friends, my comrades in arms, being medicated to shut them up. I don't know, I could name brands that are just like common currency in my world. And I'm one of our goals at the organization that I'll explain to you at the end of the presentation. We're going to take a careful look at the natural ingredients and form an actual supplement company that people can rely on for as an alternative to these harsh chemicals. So here's one observation I made early on. If you give 5 neurologists the sequelae or symptoms of your TBI, you'll likely get 5 different diagnoses. My friend David, who's in my book, he compared the current state of research into mild TBI with AIDS research in the early 1980s. The real cutting-edge research of this mild so-called TBI is not trickling down to or bubbling up to the major hospitals. Now here's my attempt at a solution. The brain injury recovery team model. It systematizes options that doctors often leave unexplored. It helps them make referral decisions deliberately. It gives patients and caregivers a better understanding, a roadmap of what lies ahead in their recovery process. Okay, that's where we're headed. So awareness. This is where the quote I had in my book was a quote from Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. This is not who I am. You're seeing your life unfold before you, and something's gone terribly wrong with it, and it's a brain injury. But this sense of awareness, the reason those of us who are survivors, we bond so quickly and so intensely, it's because finally, as opposed to many of our friends or even family, we've met someone who confirms for me that I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, I'm not lazy, and you know what? I need a proper diagnosis. This is what life feels like, instead of the gentle sands of time floating down upon your head, you start feeling the pains of everyday life. Now, this is kind of where you're woken up to. What's going on around me? And then you see the door called death there, and the suicide rate is just unacceptably high, particularly among our veterans. Veteran suicide rate exceeded the combat deaths sometime in the late 2011, and that's when I was finishing up the final version of my book. When I read that, I felt I knew why. Because they came home, they looked great. They had no strategies for living inside their brain injury. And so I doubled my efforts on the sections on depression and suicide and living this new life. I really poured my heart into it. Let's step back. Why is treating TBI so hard? Well, people can sustain a so-called mild TBI and have traumatic outcomes. It's often called the invisible injury. It's like your brain is in traction. Everyday life becomes a challenge. Managing pain, sustaining a conversation, reading. I'm friends with, and myself used to be lifelong readers, and you can only read a certain number of minutes at a time, Shopping, organizing things, following a recipe, an evening with friends, for crying out loud, can be so draining and yet fun. You can be laughing, but you pay for it 2 to 3 days afterwards, and that's confirmed by anybody you can talk to who's living this life. Here's another way of looking at the categories. This categorization was on a brochure, and part of my strategy for explaining my fingerprint of my injury to my family was to take a yellow marker and say, this is me, this is me, this is me. And that's actually a good thing to do. Yes, how is your pain today? One of the things that's consistent among my survivor friends is the importance of humor. I don't know if any of these are familiar to any of you, but these are things that I go to when I need a shot of humor. The Faulty Towers going clockwise, Faulty Towers on the top right, Alan Partridge in the middle, the Honeymooners on the bottom right, dark place there, and then good old Barney Fife on the bottom left, who still cracks me up. But this injury, you feel it all the time. You can go to a very nice resort, and you can't enjoy it. You've dragged your injury there. The depression, the anxiety, all those things we just looked at. One of the other sensations that requires an extreme focus and concentration and depth and strength of will is the sense of being trapped. Because I don't know if any of you have been in an MRI, but it can be very claustrophobic. I had to come out of it right away, and they had to give me Valium. And this is some people's worst nightmares, to be trapped in a closet or a trunk of a car or in your own brain. No nurse is going to come and pull me out of this MRI. I've got to make the best of my brain the way it is now, and that approach is the philosophical. You know, you have long conversations with fellow survivors about how do you deal with this madness. Defensive. Now, why would you get defensive? Okay, well, you know what? If you look the same and if you look great, the worst thing you can do to a person with an invisible illness is make them feel like they need to prove how sick they are. And by the way, this picture is not of a neurologist. It's of a, I think he was an art forger. I saw this article in the New Yorker, and I thought, you know, that's sort of the attitude that we're up against many times with so-called experts, because they've been to the schools and and we want to say, look, listen to the person in front of you. You know, we have a lot to tell you, believe it or not. Many doctors I've been to would make terrible detectives, homicide detectives. They didn't pick up on any clues at all. And now these are things that I actually heard. I don't know why you're not getting better. Okay. Frankly, I'm discouraged at your progress. Most people would be better by now. And finally, your MRI is fine. They just looked at it. Then he found that the pituitary gland was empty. Because I had to go in for a second MRI, the endocrinologist jumped right on it. He said, your pituitary gland was damaged in that accident. And then other things, you know, friends say things like, yo, well, my son had 8 concussions, and I didn't know what to do with that information. Did you have a relaxing day today, Mr. Byler? How on earth do you get your head around that? Because I hadn't gone to work, obviously. You know, I couldn't work after my car accident. But I wasn't relaxing. Put it behind you and move on. Okay, I'm trying. And you think they're thinking, what brain injury? And then this gets to the core of who you are as a person. Why can't you go back to work? It gets very lonely. In fact, the person I quote the most in my book is a guy named Matt Sweeney from Charlestown, a big Irish guy, tough guy, veteran of the first Gulf War. We became friends because of our common injury. And so we're blood brothers, you know. And he told me, nobody on the face of the earth, no doctor, therapist, or rehab person knows what it's like to be affected by TBI. They know only what their patients report and what their textbooks say. Loneliness is so lonely. There should be another word for it. How do you mourn the loss of yourself? And you know, he told me this about 7 years ago while I was writing the book. He told me this about last week, too. He said there should be another word for it. He's the... oh, there we go. He's the one who told me he hadn't had eye contact with anybody in about 6 months, and he's married. This is Matt on his wedding day. This is Matt recently. This is what depression and betrayal and all these things does to a person. Depression. Another friend of mine is an artist, and this is how she depicted her depression. And this is the same artist, Elizabeth. This is how she felt. You see her eye is in there, and she's holding on to hope, holding on to her heart. She doesn't want to let go, but she's feeling very vulnerable right now. Loss of self, very big issue. Okay, that's the awareness of the issue. Let's get into the adjustment. To have and have not. Seen as a whole person, a TBI patient's condition and course of treatment must account for the interdisciplinary nature of a brain injury. Rehabilitation interventions have as much to do with recovery as medical ones. And this is the model. This is the team. This is the checklist. So that instead of jumping to the pharmaceutical solution or the surgical solution, let's make sure we know what our gauges are. Something as fundamental as a sleep study. Basically, you have to ask yourself, why am I feeling so bad? What are the reasons? And this is a good start. This is kind of our stake in the ground. You know, we made up this model, and so we're saying at a minimum, include every one of these professionals and get your gauge and find out what needles need moving in the positive direction. So again, a checklist, why you might feel terrible. So on the medical side, this is the endocrinologist, very important. Not many people know this, but many people with a traumatic brain injury begin having serious problems with their endocrine system. and my numbers were way off. And it took them 5 years to even think about having me see an endocrinologist. I wasted 5 years of feeling miserable. I could have been somewhat less miserable if my testosterone levels were not under 100, and they should have been way more than that. Neuropsychiatrist, very important. Not just your garden variety psychiatrist. It has to be somebody who understands the difference between madness and schizophrenia and bipolar and traumatic brain injury. We are prescribed medicines that were not intended for us. We need to be ingesting neuro-restorative ingredients, neuroprotective things. None of this stuff that's eating away at our brains and oftentimes makes the depression worse. I mean, I never had suicidal thoughts before I started taking medication to prevent them. Okay, neuropsychologist. This one's important. We talked about being the invisible injury. Okay, so now everybody needs to quantify this injury because there's not many markers. Well, a big marker is the neuropsych exam. Okay, that's anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. You spread it out over 3 or 4 sessions, and just like an MRI takes a 3-dimensional picture of your brain, then a good neuropsych report and a good person who writes up the final report, you're testing the brain's cognitive capacities in all kinds of ways, logic and color and space and reasoning. It's actually fascinating. I was fascinated watching myself go through it, and then to see what the report said. Neurooptometrist. This is a big one because from what I've learned from there's only a few hundred of these in the U.S. Only a few hundred of someone who specializes in optometry, but its connection to brain traumas and how it can affect people's vision. A lot of my colleagues now are telling me about the vision problems they never had before their incident. And then, of course, the psychopharmacologist. And these are two very, very fundamental things to test. Get them through a sleep study. They might feel awful because they're not getting their REM. Of course. Put them with a CPAP. They'll sleep like a baby, and they'll wake up feeling somewhat refreshed. And unlike, I mean, these things are low-hanging fruit, as you might say. Vestibular testing. Well, I don't suffer from this, but one of the ironies of certain people's injuries is, like my friend Greg in my book, he's a fireman. He can't get on a ladder anymore because his vestibular system is all messed up, sense of balance. So that's, at a minimum, the medical side of the team. Now, this book had a big impact on me. I don't read much, but I read this cover to cover. It's by Daniel Carlat, Unhinged. He talks very, very frankly about the conflict of interest between prescribing doctors and the perks from the reps, from the pharmaceutical reps, and that it's consequently too, therapy is becoming a lost art and science. They go to psychiatry school to learn about people's intentions and motivations and past experiences, and then they all of a sudden just say, well, you know what? I'd rather have 4 patients in an hour. I'll get them in and out of here. I'll prescribe medications, and I can justify it by journal articles. Okay, well, time out. Time out. Remember why you got into this business in the first place. And I hate to tell you, but this actually is not far from the truth. I actually embarrassed the doctor one time because I said twice in a row after 2 visits that the stationery he puts in front of me to take notes on, she was a neuropsychiatrist. She shouldn't have a name of a drug on it. I said, that's, again, leading the witness. So she was embarrassed and got me a blank piece of paper. Discouraging data on the antidepressant. Now, I should tell you, the New Yorker actually caught some flack for this because of the cruelty of the hanging rat. But I thought it made a good cartoon. And then again, this is how our brains feel, like pickles in brine. Now, the person who takes medicine must recover twice, once from the disease and once from the medicine. This is no light matter. So we go back. This is the team. I just wanted to give you a perspective where we're headed. We've just gone through that medical side of the team. Now here's the therapy side of the team. Occupational therapist, physical therapist, social worker, SLP, and vocation rehab. And time prevents me from going into any detail on these categories. So I'll just kind of back up and say one thing I talk about in my book is basically survivors are looking to clinicians to provide 3 main things And then I have a whole lot of examples of those three things that are within their professional jurisdiction: emotional support, informed guidance, and tactical support. For example, watch for signs of clinical depression and suicide. I've heard these things. I'm telling you, John, if I had a gun, I'd shoot myself. I've heard that more than once. And oftentimes, I just want to disappear. I've said that more than once. And I won't go into any detail on this, but if I boiled it down in my book, what my highlights were from all my strategy sessions with my team. And entire support group meetings could be run on each one of these. 1, pace yourself. 2, count the cost of every activity. 3, don't be hard on yourself. 4, write things down. 5, avoid isolation. 6, be hopeful. Please handle with care. We are fragile. And again, because we drag the injury with us, we need to learn to travel lightly by figuring out our critical path for that day. And it oftentimes means relinquishing responsibilities, especially if you're a high achiever. It's very frustrating to be a high achiever and to be so debilitated and not look like there's anything wrong with you. But you know that the neural pathways are blocked and that something is making your speech break up or make you cry in the middle of a conversation, you know. And I will say this about support groups: they should come with a warning, like on a pack of cigarettes. I visited one less than a year after my accident, and I said at the time, never again. It was really depressing. These two guys were 8 years into their injury and in the middle of painful divorces. Well, first of all, I thought I was going to be better in a year. That's what the data told me. 85% of the time you're going to get better. Well, I didn't. I didn't walk away from that. And so, yeah, last year, painful divorce after 33 years of marriage. Worst experience of my life. And you know what? In that time at that support group meeting, I wasn't strong enough to be the strong one. I was the one that needed support. So I've since gone back to support groups, but I tend to help provide some structure to them and make sure that we end on positive notes. You know, we had an amazing one in Wichita a couple weeks ago, and we're having another one this week. And I'm really looking forward to it now, you know. And this one I couldn't resist. It's always poor you, isn't it, Albert? That's kind of how it feels. But there is a fraternity of the injured, and it is strong. We talk in shorthand to each other. We feel less alone or isolated. We laugh and we say, you get it, you understand. And here's the other all-inclusive nature of traumatic brain injury. My friend Don, who I don't believe is with us any longer, he was suffering from herpes encephalitis, which sustained brain damage, and he thought my story was his story, you know, and so we share strategies with each other. It is very much a battlefield experience. So that's the team. We were in the adjustment section, just giving a little bit of markers along the way here, like any good presentation. So again, we're calling it the brain injury recovery team. We're saying it's an interdisciplinary approach, and we're saying that these checklists ensure efficiency and efficacy in building a TBI recovery team. So my dream is to have one school, one graduate school, where we can have a specialty in traumatic brain injury and PTSD. Effective brain injury recovery depends on highly and specifically trained medical and rehabilitation professionals. Just as recovery takes place in one person, training and education for recovery, this complex and this dynamic and this confusing, it should take place in one school, I believe. And I found this great picture, and it lined up great with my model. So now it doesn't have to look like that, but I picture it being more like out on the prairie, or where there's a lot of land. And but in any case, it looked like a nice visual. But that's one of the missions that I'm on, is to build a school. And I do want to end on this note, since we've been talking about clinicians, that I must tell you all that I believe to be kind is more important than to be right. And many times what people need is not a brilliant mind that speaks, but a special heart that listens. And you know, I saw that, and it moved me profoundly. And I actually, let's see, I think it was on LinkedIn. I didn't want to try to remember what I had said, but I said, this is so true. I said, those of us with special needs meet with so many specialists, in my case, members of the brain injury recovery team. And the men and women who begin with kindness tip their hand on their honest intentions. Purely cerebral approaches are shallow, brittle. A warm human spirit breathes more life into us than a well-credentialed expert in the field. So just to double back on what our objectives were, I described the model, and I believe if you took that model real seriously, you would improve the quality of your life by 25%. And I'm going to take a break there, John, because it's a good stopping place for me. It's about 2/3 of the way through for the next big push. The next big push is describing what I hope to accomplish with my sequel and with the Bison Project.
Very good, John. It's great to get the patient's perspective on this conference, which is all science. Would you like to continue, John, or do you want us to ask some questions now? What would you like to do?
No, what I'd like to do is I have some nice cold water here, and I'm noticing that my speech is breaking up.
Okay.
So what I need to do is I'll take a couple questions, and then while I drink water, and then I'll finish the presentation so I know it's behind me, and then we can open it up to more questions.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, like I say, it's good to get a patient's perspective, and you know what someone said in your presentation about it's a similar situation to when AIDS was around. I remember very well when AIDS was actually first being discovered. They didn't isolate the microorganism that was causing it. They just thought it was a lifestyle disease of gay people, etc. And I can remember the confusion. No one knew what to do. No one knew how to treat it. But once it was isolated, the progress began to be made. And I don't know, maybe it's similar with traumatic brain when they can isolate the exact injury. However, I'd like you to introduce to you Simon Downs. He's a medical student from Japan. He just joined us, John.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, this is Simon. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a clinical psychologist and a medical student in Japan, and I really enjoyed your presentation and the points you brought up, especially about the member of the team not only being either a neuropsychologist, psychiatrist, or someone really who has knowledge in the area of traumatic brain injury. I really look forward to hearing the rest of your presentation, and I apologize for the sound, so I'm going to cut off now.
Thanks for joining us, Simon. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, John, whenever you're ready, if you want.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll be happy to. I'm happy to.
Just a second, John. I think Amar, do you have a question for John? Or a comment?
Yeah, sorry, I was out of sound, so I reconnected. In fact, yeah, I have many things to come in about John. Thank you very much, John, for this very nice presentation about a very important subject, and that we, as a surgeon, in fact, I was interested to join this hangout because I'm a neurosurgeon. So this is a very important problem in that doctors can't usually understand well what the patient really feels, and you describe it very precisely and very clearly how it could be so importantly grave and maybe disastrous for some patients, and we should know how to positively recover patients into the right way. So this will be a great thing to have such an idea and such a team. In fact, I should concentrate on the role of doctors in this, because and this is what you said about, in addition to the family, in addition to your important others, this is very important. And this is the idea about that you feel that you are a different person. In fact, I face it with some friends. I have a friend I have a childhood friend who had a severe head injury, and in fact, after trauma, after recovery, I felt really that he's a new person. He's a new one. He's not my old friend, although still he's a nice and gentleman, but there is something changed in his personality. So we should realize this with other patients, not only with those who we know well. This is what's happening in their families. So I think communication with the patient is very important for us as doctors to get this. And in fact, you tell several of the quotes that we usually say, that like you have a normal MRI and I don't know why you are not getting better. Yes, in fact, we should admit that we say such things to patients, and this is very essential to try to change this behavior, and we should do more communication, we do more cooperation with the patient, with the rehabilitation team. I think that the most important thing is proper communication and sympathy with the patients, with the TBI patients, even mild TBIs. So this is very important. And the other thing is the medical treatment. Many of doctors write prescriptions for these antidepressants and antipsychotics, and they don't really know how much these drugs have side effects, or drowsiness and so on. Unless someone tries this, really, if someone tries these drugs, really he will know well how these are really affecting the behavior of the patients. And this idea about suicidal thoughts, it is something serious. We have some drugs that really have suicidal thoughts and may lead some patients to suicide. So it needs a lot of orientation and from the side of doctors, and a lot of understanding of the patient's condition. So this is a very important point that you have stressed about. And again, your role as in the support, that patients supporting each other and explaining to each other, and this is very important to avoid this loneliness that you told us about. So in fact, what you are doing is really very important, and I think it should change the way we behave with our patients and the way we design support groups. I'm so thankful for these ideas, in fact. And I would like to say, to ask about to tell us more about the role of the neurosurgeons and the psychiatrists in your team. They are taking good, you have good collaboration with them at the time being, or just the support groups and rehabilitation team?
Thank you, Amar. Would you like to continue, John?
Yes, so sure. Yes, I want to thank you. I want to also thank you for those very kind comments. It means a lot to me. You know, it's all I think about. It's all I think about, and I'm glad to get the confirmation from you, sir, because you care. You know, I can tell that you care, and I can tell that that you know a truly wise person will at least consider the thought that maybe he or she hasn't been doing something the right way along the way, and you seem to be open to this new way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
So here's the chronology of my book ended in 2010, basically. Now, 2010 was the year that I was diagnosed with clinical off-the-chart stress. I had just become so stressed about everything. I was a nervous wreck. I would jump if somebody mentioned, you know, if somebody dropped a spoon. I was a wreck. And but then I finished the book. But then my whole journey with post-traumatic stress kicked in, and that's when I realized that even an organization like Spalding doesn't know what to do with us after about 3 years. I think the statistics bear that out. You stop getting referred to your team, you know, and they were who was there for you. Well, no longer. You're on your own. And so this title actually got me into a brain injury conference that I had to back out of because of my health a couple years ago. This was the title that I was going to talk about in San Francisco a few years ago for the World Congress of the International BIA. Now, I had actually presented the team model in Edinburgh, Scotland. This would have been February or March of 2012. So that model I just walked you through was a poster presentation up in Edinburgh, Scotland. So the title is Neuroplastic Cities, which is a play on the word neuroplasticity, and because we're having to look beyond hospitals and medical schools for neurotherapy. And so each chapter I envision being a collaboration with somebody who's helped me with all of these categories. And so again, we're talking about a checklist. I've heard great things about hyperbaric oxygen treatments. I want some. I can't get them. Light therapy. These things cost money. Craniosacral therapy, you know, there's a poor man's version of this, and that is get someone you love to rub your head tenderly. That's wonderful. There's a lot of nerve endings up there. And the other thing is nutrition. Probably one of the top 3 things you can do is this. Pay attention to what you're ingesting every day and drink a lot of water. This is just your average, you know, this happened to be there's all kinds of articles about this now. I won't bore you with the details about brain health. That's a whole another category. Nutritional supplements. It's a confusing world. We're given these catalogs, and we're not giving any kind of guideposts. Every page of these catalogs scream out at you like this is what you need. So I'm working with a doctor, Dr. Garrett, who's my doctor. He's the one who got me off of my pharmaceuticals with really intensive attention paid to what I'm ingesting every day. And so I'm pharma free as of maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago. It hasn't been easy. You know, you have to really pay attention to sugar, corn syrup, gluten, dairy, even. He's got his reasons. And I do enjoy an occasional glass of wine. And then walk, don't run, because running joggles your brain and it makes it hurt. Music is huge. I'm not a professional musician, but I'm a long-time guitar player, especially just electric blues, very simple idiom. And music has been huge for my recovery, very important to me. We have to pay attention to the marijuana issue. You know, when you're suffering and you see words like neuroprotective, neurorestorative, neuroplasticity, there are many studies being done now. This is Sanjay Gupta. You know, this is the mainstreaming of this medicine. He says it's irresponsible to not provide the best care we can, and that care might involve marijuana. I started running across these are articles from 5 years ago that I included in my book. You can imagine the progress that's been made in the past 5 years. Incredible titles. We have a member of our team. I have a team of 17 people now, core loyalists, I call them. One is a neuroscientist I met on LinkedIn, and he's our chief neurology officer. He's also our chief cannabis officer because he understands all that stuff. Smartest guy I ever, well, I won't say the smartest guy I ever met. He's extremely knowledgeable. And you know, anecdotal evidence is there for our veterans. You know, the PTSD is killing our soldiers more surely than the enemy. And this medicine is helping a lot of people, and we need to face that fact. It just is. Now, it does affect your personality. I used to have short hair, you know. Now I'm not ingesting now. I'm in a state called Kansas where it's against the law. But it's not a mild drug. But you're not partying. You're not smoking to get high. You're trying to not feel terrible and suicidal, basically. Asian therapies. Boy, we could have a whole webinar just on Asian therapies. You know, tried and tested remedies and therapies, and even if it's to get you through the day. Not a lot of these things aren't lasting. You might feel bad another couple days from now, but if you can get through this day and have somebody rub your foot and the top of your head, you're going to feel better. These are life-affirming. And other cultures have their own home remedies. I'm actually speaking of Iraq. Your neighbor Iran. There's a doctor out here in Wichita from Iran. He was one of the generals in the Shah's military. Okay, he came here decades ago, and he's built a business on supplements having to do with his father's home recipes of natural medicines, and he's not curing. Yeah, he's like helping people's conditions with these formulas from Iran. That's fascinating. So I met him. We had lunch together. There's faith healing and prayer. You know, this has been big. I pray my way through the day. I mean, sometimes you can't even leave your room. You can't leave your apartment. You're saying, God, I can't do this. I just can't do it. And you find a way. I read a great book. I've been a Christian for many years now, but I read about communion in a whole different way, where it talks about Jesus on the cross and how he bore our sins, but he also bore our infirmities and our afflictions. And I started taking him at his word. I started believing it. And so I start to put my afflictions on him on the cross, and so that I can lead a resurrected life. You know. She's doing really good work. If you've never heard of her, she just even anecdotally, these are notes from the underground for you all. She's making a difference in people's lives. Dr. Caroline Leaf, please Google her. She's doing very good work. I'm a big fan of hers. I drove all the way to Dallas, Texas, part of a conference that she spoke at. Cognitive behavioral therapy was extremely useful to me. Particularly Theodore's model that I learned at Mount Sinai on the Upper East Side in New York City. I was part of a 3-month program there. And he has a model that helped us all understand what happens between a trigger and a behavior like slamming a door, and how you unravel that, how you unbraid that. Brilliant. And it's the kind of thing where you literally can take a napkin out over coffee and walk somebody through this model, and they're going to look at you like you just untangled the most complicated knot they'd ever lived with. It's an elegant model. It's powerful. Summarizing some of cognitive behavioral therapy is woulda, coulda, shoulda. Next, yes, there is a move on aspect to this injury, and many of us who are surviving the best are just saying moving on, and it can never hurt to see a picture of a baby pig. I mean, I'm a 58-year-old man. And I'm not too proud to say that I'll tell you, when I see pictures of puppies and kittens and piggies, this is very, it warms my heart. And so we're always sharing pictures with each other that help. And this is one of my favorites. You just feel all warm inside. So the final section is acceptance, and this is where in my book I just really wanted to beef that section up too, because it's hard. And you loop back to adjustment. I loop back to adjustment every day, but I just got to always get to acceptance. And so this scripture has meant a lot to me and other people, as it turns out. It's Jehovah himself talking. He says, "I know the thoughts I think toward you. They're thoughts of peace. They're not of evil, to give you hope in your latter end." And I cling to that. I cling to that. Now, somebody at a student asked me, "Has anything gotten better after your injury?" And I hadn't thought of that. I'd just been thinking about all that I had lost. And it's yes, compassion for someone sleeping on a bench, and the statistics bear that out. A lot of homeless people have brain injuries, and they're there because they didn't have any support system, their family turned their back, or their disability ran out, or something happened, and they fell through the cracks, and many of us are basically our brake pads are thin, if that's a good metaphor. Poverty is right around the corner because we don't have reliable means of support. And so we reach out to each other constantly. We reach out to each other constantly. We're always having shipwrecks. We're always having shipwrecks. Something bad always happens, but here we are in the boat, and those of us who are my core team, my core loyalists, we cling to each other, just like this, in many ways. That's how it feels. You take your turn dragging somebody else up, and then they're going to drag you up maybe the next day. And this was a sign that hung up at Spalding Rehab. It was done by a survivor. When you've passed a certain milestone, you start really realizing, you look back on the road you just come from, and you say, wow, there was a lot of potholes in that. And so you do start getting this swagger about you, because nothing is hard now. Nothing really phases us after you've been through a certain testing time, a time of testing. Charles Darwin, this is a profound quote for me. It's not the strongest of the species that survives. It's not. It's not even the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And that's all about acceptance. And this was a picture I took in London. Actually, I was there for that conference up in Edinburgh, and I was walking around kind of getting ready in my mind to meeting everybody. And then I saw this, and I thought, this is awesome. This shows the power of life. Whatever obstacle, it might be a metal gate. That tree says, I don't care about your metal gate. I'm going to grow. And so this has been a very inspirational image for me to think through all the gates in my life, Now, I landed back in Kansas where I was born, and it's right in the middle of America, and a lot of open spaces. They call it the Great Plains out here. And so we call it the heart of America. That where that heart is where Kansas is, and that's where I'm talking to you from right now. And when I've been on looking at the map over dinner over the past few years, I started thinking about the need for an organization that picks up where the brain injury associations leave off. There is a national organization in this country, the Brain Injury Association of America, but they're not represented in every state. So there's work to be done. This acronym, I'll tell you what the acronym stands for. And by the way, the bison is just this amazing, almost magical creature. There's a preserve about 20 miles from where I now live, and I must tell you this one experience I had because it led to this whole creation of this organization. I landed here about 4 years ago. My PTSD had broken me. I was a broken man 4 years ago. I couldn't walk well. My speech was impossible, and I cried all the time. Some bad things happened, and so I came back to Kansas, and I drove out to see the bison, and I saw them off in the distance, about a mile or two away, on the other side of this fence. And all of a sudden, I felt drowsy, and almost like in the Bible where a prophet sits under a tree, you know, and falls asleep, and then something happens. Well, I slept there in this field, this open field, for about an hour, and I woke up, and I did not take this picture. My sister did on a different day, but that is what I saw when I woke up. On the other side of the fence, this herd of bison had walked the entire way to check me out. and I felt flattered. I felt together with them. I felt like fellow mammals, you know. So I just felt honored to have been visited by this amazing herd of males and females. And so one thing led to another. And the acronym is Brain Injury Support, and operational and neurological. Operational refers to the tactical help that our organization will help with families. The paperwork, specifically. We're going to be very tactical here. We're going to get real smart people and to handle the medical paperwork, the legal paperwork, insurance, and the neurological refers to brain health, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about, to expand the definition of what we mean by a traumatized brain. Now, I won't spend any time on this, but on LinkedIn I posted this poster recently because I'm gearing up for a launch on the 1st of June, which is the Bison Project, which I won't take your time now, but it's what gets me up in the morning. And this is an example of one of the what we're calling edutainment tours, where it's part education and part entertainment, where we actually have a musical. It's called "You Look Great," the musical, because why should the Mormons have all the fun? And that's kind of a joke, because in this country there's a very popular and funny musical called The Book of Mormon. So that's something that's happening out here in the Santa Fe Trail. And just one thing that I'm gathering a lot of interest in actually is bison as a political force in this country, because so many people are just disaffected and disillusioned with what the Republicans and Democrats are offering. So, you know, back about 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt started the Bull Moose Party, and so we're going to there's some people and rattle some cages. And specifically here in Kansas, our very unpopular governor is stepping down in 2018, and so I'm getting a lot of interest in running a candidate and take the state house by storm. And I'll leave you with this. He's a poet, Bertolt Brecht. He says, that's all, but it's not enough. It's like the man who carried a brick with him to show the world what his house was like. And I'll leave you with this. Sometimes I'll get a photograph from a friend holding my book, and I treasure. He's been through hell and back, my friend Bob. So feel free to email me your picture holding the book, and we're going to put it all together. So this is my second to last slide, kind of a sign off, and then I'll leave you with this one, and I'll just leave it up, and feel free to ask me any questions now while I drink some water.
Well, very good, John. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And I welcome you, and I hope we can build a community with your help of traumatic brain injury patients that can meet on Hangouts. Of course, it's best to meet in person. However, there are some occasions where patients can't get out of the house, or it's not convenient, or maybe they don't want to travel or whatever. They don't have a car. So hopefully we can utilize this platform to bring the traumatic brain injury and the bison community together. Um, and Simon, any comments? Are you still there, Simon? You may not be.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I'm just arriving at my station, but I watched the whole presentation. I was very impressed, and I agree that the community, with this speech, this presentation, as its basis, would be a wonderful start. I think it's fantastic. I'd like to learn more about his book, and so I thank you so much. So I look forward to this continuing conversation.
Thanks, Simon, for participating. And Amar, would you like to comment or questions?
Yeah, thank you. It was a very great hangout, in fact, and I hope that I have that book. I definitely will purchase the book and read it, in fact, and I believe that the bison will be something significant, and it will be a good model for everyone in the world to have. In fact, we may try, any neurotrauma center should try to upgrade their projects and their systems to get benefit from your ideas. In fact, it's very nice.
Well,
and I always believe that in this cooperation, in the last hangout, I told John that we want. I talked about bullet injuries in the head, falling bullet injuries. I told John that we need rehabilitation. There was a rehabilitation doctor who have interest in this. I told him that that we should meet him. We should try to talk to him. He have some patients with such conditions. So I believe that communication and interaction with rehabilitation team and directly with patients, especially intelligent patients like you, will definitely help upgrade our systems to recover our patients from the serious consequences of TBI. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Omar. Okay, John, we're going to have to close now, but I really appreciate you coming out, and we'll talk later. I definitely want to help you form a community, like Amar said, to help communicate with each other and to communicate with occasionally have doctors speak, but especially to give patient support within your brain injured community. And I thank you very much, John.
Okay, well, I'm delighted with how it went, and I'm happy to have met so many new friends today. And I know this will be an encouragement to a lot of my friends and colleagues as well, because they'll feel that their voices are heard. Because I'm passing along a lot of information to you, representing many people, and I feel very happy now, stronger. I feel stronger now.
Very good. Let's build a community.
Okay.
And we'll talk later. Let's build a community on Neurosurgical TV.
Okay, I'm in. I'm all in.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Bye.
Thank you.